The last decade has been difficult for every single species. The war with the skid marks, that ravenous reptilian species, when they came in and destroyed entire cities without hesitation or warning. They leveled entire continents and destroyed entire planets before being pushed back to their own sector and then feeling what happens when you do such things. I was on Arcadia 234 and was running a large farm outside the city of Chernobyl, a massive hub for this agro world, and it was actually a very nice city, kept really clean. It was interesting to see the skyline when you're up high enough to see. And, well, even though this used to be a waste disposal planet, it's amazing how fertile the ground is. We were happy there. That is, until the lizards came. They destroyed everything. They set it all alight. I saw the flash. I didn't know what was going on till I looked over towards the skyline and saw nothing but a giant mushroom cloud. Then the wind came and knocked me, not over, but it pushed me enough. I knew what had happened, and my blood completely ran cold and hot at the same time. I remember jumping off the giant combine, just slamming it in neutral and jumping off towards the house, trying to warn everybody. But on the way there, I heard something screech in through the atmosphere and turned to look as one of their corvettes or frigates, I couldn't tell, came in and fired on the house. The house was gone in a moment in a massive explosion. Shrapnel came up, and I still have the scars as much of the pieces hit me. My wife, my children, hell, they even hit the barn next door. Everything was gone in moments. I just couldn't. I laid there. I couldn't move. They must have thought I was dead or something, so they left us alone. At least the few of us that survived the initial bombardment. It was horrific. They burned everything. They destroyed everything, hitting us with nukes, energy weapons, chemicals, and even standard bombardment. They set everything alight. They decided they were going to use famine as a weapon, and it did work for a while. The famine stretched across multiple species as agro worlds burned to cinders. What's even worse is that the pestilence from the skid marks' bioweapons were just as effective as starvation. They were able to create a virus that had a 6-day incubation period. We didn't even know if anybody was infected, but we did know that even without showing symptoms, they had already passed the virus on. By the time symptoms appeared, it was far too late to help them. It was so bad that they were actually bleeding out of their eyes, and just like many of the bio attacks, many died screaming, convulsing as fluids poured out of every single orifice or created new ones. It turned out to have a 90% lethality rate, leaving survivors completely infertile. This was a true genocidal weapon, and we knew it. What was worse is they used it on Earth. I might have been halfway across the cosmos, but I found out that it killed everyone that it touched. And now the old family farm just sits vacant. The fences are still there. The barn is still there. The multiple barns, actually. The house is there with everything inside, the clothes, the dishes, everything. But everything is just sitting there, as there's no one alive to tend the fields. The animals still survive, of course, but they're very, very feral. But the virus itself eventually burned out, leaving Earth a shell of itself. I learned about this as I got on the refugee ship on its way to Arius. This was once a paradise world, and now it's been ravaged by war and just covered by refugees. I arrived with what I could carry, which wasn't really much. I couldn't find much in the house and clothes. I didn't even find my family. I was able to find some resources to help me out for a while, but there just wasn't much at all. I was going to be happy to hear from family. I wanted to tell them that I was safe and that I was coming back, But when I called in, there was absolutely no response, and I couldn't figure out why. No matter who I called, nothing came back. That's when the reports came in about the virus. And then behind that was the lists of names. It was a very quick search to look for certain names, and my heart fell to my stomach as I read them one by one, and my heart fell so far it came out my ass as I dropped to my knees, realizing they were all gone. Despair had me, and it made me walk around the city in a stupor. I don't even know how far I walked for a long time, and eventually I found myself coming somewhat out of it as the shimmering light from a sign from an underground trade post was right next to me. I looked up and I remembered we used to call these pawn shops back on Earth. And I looked at myself, I looked at it, and I came to a decision. I walked in and placed my bag on the counter with what was left in it and said, "I'm willing to trade." As he started going through it, I looked at the shabby, cheap-made pistols that were on the wall. He seemed to notice my gaze, and seeing what was in the bag, he simply said, "Which one for everything in the bag and the bag itself?" He rummaged through to make sure there was everything in, and then he reached over and pulled out an ancient revolver. I checked it, making sure that the barrel wasn't plugged, it still had its firing pin and everything like that. He saw my discerning face as I went through each piece one by one, realizing I knew what I was looking for. He simply added, "It works, or it would be at a discount." Around this time, I could feel someone behind me, standing off in the corner. I could see in the reflection that a Vex had come in, or Zex, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. I could feel it behind me, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw the female just standing there, waiting quietly. I didn't say anything because she had the same look as me. I turned back to the merchant and I told him, "Throw in one bullet, and you got yourself a deal." He looked at me as he handed me the pistol with the bullet on the side and said, "You got a steal." And then he thanked me for my business right before I turned away. I was on my way to the door when I heard him scream right in her face, "7 credits, and nothing more." Something made me pause. Something made me stop right there before the door, and I don't know what it was. The bullet had my name on it, but something is wrong. Something is wrong in the situation, and I had to stay put where I was. Something wasn't making sense, and I had my hand in my pocket, and my pistol was in my hand. As she removed the decorative ring from her finger, I knew what that meant. Jexmic for life. Actually, they marry forever due to genetic engineering similar to us. And I remembered the ring meant that her husband must be dead. Mostly like due to the war, and I just couldn't do anything, so I stood there staring at him and said, "Hey, mister, I got a question. That ring's worth 7 credits? How much is your life worth?" There was a quick hesitation as he turned and looked at me, as he realized a human was standing there with a pistol. After the loss of Earth, humans had been the driving force against the skid marks. They had a rage that had given them a reputation of being nearly impossible to kill, even losing multiple limbs, losing eyes, having a jaw blown off. It didn't matter. They just wanted to kill. They had turned into machines that once they found their target, they would not stop at anything to kill and kill and kill the offending species. And this is why there are no more skid marks. The humans had washed them away with planetary invasions and bombardments that would not stop until 10 kilometers deep of the entire planet was nothing but slag and glass. Now, one is looking right into all 4 eyes of the pawnshop man, knowing the pistol is in my pocket and my hand is holding it. Leaving the shop It turns out that ring ended up fetching 2,000 credits, enough for me to get back to Earth twice, no problem. I spoke with the young lady as we walked back towards the lights that aimed towards the spaceport. I told her what happened to me and my family. She told me a similar story about how the skid marks had invaded her world and her newlywed husband. Newlywed as in they literally just got married that day. They hadn't even quite finished with the ceremony when the invasion happens. He came up with the idea to hide her underneath the floor, which has never really been thought of before. And when the skid marks demanded her when they came in, beating the hell out of him, he refused to say anything, refused to give up his woman, and he paid for it with everything. She couldn't see anything through the boards as she was sitting there in complete blackness, but the sounds of him being beaten and then torn apart and eaten haunted her. As she spoke, she seemed to shake a bit. The rest of her family was either dead or scattered, and she had nowhere else to go. She'd been hawking jewelry just to survive. She was down to her last ring she didn't want to give up. I knew the Jeks were usually covered in strange ornaments because, well, that's just part of their culture. I didn't think that would be currency. As we crossed the long bridge leading back towards the city with a spaceport, she reached out and took my hand, trying to comfort herself. I looked down at her slightly green skin and that strange dirty blonde hair and those deep, deep blue eyes. And then I squeezed her hand and asked, "So, you ever been to Texas?" She pulled herself against me and said, "I think I will love it there." Realizing the bullet no longer had my name on it, I pulled out the pistol and gave it more airtime than a young Tony Hawk at the X Games. In that moment, I now had a mission, a goal, a plan. Since I had no enemy to aim my rage at the loss of my family, I needed something to keep me going. And just like after any conflict, once everything is destroyed and the conflict is over, it's time to rebuild, and that is exactly what I plan on doing. Yet now I'm not going to be rebuilding by myself. As I looked down at the woman on my arm, I realized that the pistol I was holding, it was named wrong. No, she's my new Saturday night special.